So, hi everyone. This is Andrea Fitzpatrick live on the Mama's Podcast again. And today it is my pleasure and privilege to introduce Alden Darville, CEO and founder of H2HB, Heart to Heart Business and Consciousness Coach. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Great to be here. I am so excited. I've been waiting for this all week long, and I think we're going to have a lot of fun.
I think so too. I'm just going to lunch with first, number one, what's your take on fatherhood and how important it is and how has it been for you, fatherhood?
Okay. Well, you know, I came to fatherhood late in life, and that's a story in itself right there. When we brought our Inez into the world, it was a conscious decision. It was, um, it was a very cool, conscious decision on both of our parts to do this. And
Hmm.
our intentions were pretty precise about what we wanted when we did this. So I think fatherhood is amazing. It's absolutely changed me, the person who I am. I thought I knew patience. I thought I knew understanding. I thought I knew everything, but really you just have to go to another level when you have a child. It's just like it's like nothing that no matter what I have done in my life and no matter what I've gone through and fatherhood is basically it trumps all of that. And I thought it would be a lot easier, to be honest with you, than what it was. I thought it would be easier. This is a breeze. I've always been great with my friends' kids when they were younger, but then you realize, you know what? You get to spend like a half an hour, 2 hours with the kids once or twice a week, and you call yourself a superhero. But really, when you are faced with having that child and you are in control of everything that they do for those first couple of years, as far as safety and security and learning and all of that stuff, you just realize,
Oh,
it's
wait
a
a minute.
huge responsibility. It's a huge, huge, huge responsibility that you really don't get until you're there, if you're conscious about it, of course. And
Yes.
most,
And most what?
well, we like to think that parents are,
Hmm.
when they're raising their kids.
It's
But as
interesting.
it
It's interesting you bring that up, I think, because I think a lot of parents fall into parenthood just like a lot of college students go to college. It's
mhm.
sort of something in our culture that you just do, right? Eventually you just do well, you get married, you have kids. I think it actually happens that way for a lot of people. They're not as conscious. And I say that because I have a huge extended family myself. And all of my brothers and sisters, literally all of them, including the youngest ones, had kids before I did. I was the late bloomer in the family. Everybody be like, God, you're so good with kids. Why don't you have kids? And I go, no, no, I'm waiting, I'm waiting. So
Yeah,
I was a late bloomer too. And I have three, and people go, especially when they find out how big my family is, because I have like 10 brothers and four sisters, and they go, you stopped at three? And I said, oh yeah, I stopped because I felt like I had an understanding of what I was getting into and what kind of mother I wanted to be and how I viewed motherhood and the energy that went into it. Now, I'm not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but I wanted to be a very good mother and didn't think I could stretch further than that. But just like you're explaining with your journey with fatherhood, even though I felt like I came into it pretty prepared, there were still a lot of things that was like, oh, nobody told me this. And it completely changed the person I am. Like it took all those foundational pillars and made them something different or something better. And I'm curious, like how that journey has been for you, because I'm hearing elements of like, well, what we see in society and then what we experience, right?
right. Well, it's funny, first thing I want to address the boomer generation.
Okay.
When I grew up in my neighborhood, the people across the street to me had 5 kids. People adjacent to the house had 9 kids. My next door neighbor had 4 kids. Like the
Yeah.
large families were a thing
Yep.
back in the 70s. And And so there was no lack of people to play with. You were always outside. You're always getting like nails stuck in your foot. You're always falling out of trees. You know, there was all that stuff that you just learned. And your parents, you know, they had to rule a little bit differently because they
Yeah.
had like a little army.
Yes, very
So
differently.
in that case, like the smart ones, there's always that smart kid who's so sensible. You don't have to worry about that kid so much, right? And I felt jealous of my brother that way. God rest his soul. He passed a few years ago. Um, his birthday's tomorrow, by the way. And
Aw.
he, you know, he got a lot of attention from mom. And I was thinking, well, why is that? But and, you know, I never got it till later that and Rob turned out to be absolutely fine, but probably because he got that extra attention from mom because he needed it. You know, he struggled in school. It wasn't that he wasn't smart. It's just that he had to learn a different way. And
Yes.
schools are a lot better at that now than they were back in the
Hmm.
day. But anyway, to get to your point, I would think the single most important lesson that I ever got when it came to fatherhood was patience.
Yeah.
And we can espouse all kinds of things when about talking about what you should do in certain situations, and this is how to act, and this is how to be, and you can be that coach for those people,
Mm.
but really, when it comes down to it, can you do it when you're pressed to,
Boom.
in certain situations?
Yes.
And I just did not fully grasp the amount of attention and patience a child needs. And my wife brought it up, said to me, she made me really see it. And I wrote about this a couple years ago. And our little one cannot go past a puddle without jumping into it. She just can't. It's impossible. It's impossible not to jump in that puddle. And we'd be going from A to B. And I
Hmm.
was thinking, I was always there, I said, okay, let's go, Inez. We gotta go. Omi and Opie are waiting for us for dinner. Or we gotta go this, we gotta go to dance, whatever. And then my wife, Nicola, told me, she said, at that particular time, that puddle is everything to that child, is everything in the world to that child, that puddle, the experience, the joy, everything. So imagine you doing something that you are absolutely, totally focused on, solely zeroing in on with so much joy, and someone says, let's go, right?
Hugs to your wife.
Yeah. And then I was thinking, like, oh my gosh, that is it. That is, and now we don't pass a puddle, and unless we're really braced for time or commitment, I will stand next to her in that puddle for forever. And I have that luxury of time, so I will do that, and I will just let her play in that puddle. I will let her, like, she has to walk on the snow.
Hmm.
So those times we have here, like up in Canada where I am in Nova Scotia, we live next to the ocean, so we
Hmm.
get a lot of warm currents. So we can get snow, and then it could rain the next day or be mild enough that the snow melts. But there's little piles of snow here and
Hmm.
there. Well, sometimes we have to walk, several hundred feet to just if she sees a little bit of snow, she wants to walk on it. Even putting her in the car every morning,
Hmm.
you know, just putting her in the car every morning, we don't rush. Like we just make time for it because she'll jump out onto the off the deck. When the snowman was there, when Frosty was there, she had to go talk to Frosty every day. And then it's literally 25 feet to my car, but it's sometimes it could be a 5 minute, and we've got the time, so why not do it? And it's everything to her. So patience was number one.
I think patience is huge, and I'm laughing with what you're saying here because you're right. We can talk, and I hear it. I hear it a lot actually in parenting and coaching and psychology circles, like kid psychology circles about blah 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 blah. But when you are in that, it is such a different thing. And I mean, God bless your wife, because she's absolutely right in how she just described in that moment, this is her everything, because that's the way it is. And it's really hard, I find, in my experience, it's been really hard to get a lot of adults to understand that. Look, this is the kind of importance it is to them, because adults want to just go right on through, right? It's like, why is this such a big deal? I'm like laughing because my kids, when we used to go to school before we did homeschool, and now we do homeschool, same thing going to the car. It was every single snowbank, snow pile. I mean, I had to just build in time buffers or we just would never get anywhere. And I had three. So it was like, the car would be 30 feet from the door and it would take 20 minutes to get my kids in the car.
Yeah.
And we used to have this where we used to live, we used to have this huge puddle and it was like all paved. And when it would rain, the water was clear. Like it was just
Right.
good water. And my kids would come home from being in school, being, in the whole school system, blah, blah, blah. And they would see that puddle and they just couldn't pass that puddle, right? So here they are in their clothes. They're not dressed for a puddle, getting soaking wet. And I can't even tell you how many times I have seen neighbors or people driving by and they give you this look like, some people will smile, but they look at you like, what? Because here's your little daughter out there in her dress, right? And she is just stomping with glee everywhere, and you got two daughters doing, in my case, two daughters doing that and a son. And they get soaking wet. We get to the door and it's just like, pile everything here, go in, go to the bathroom, get the tub, warm up. But the point is like having the patience to do that, especially when you've either got a call waiting or you've got dinner, you've got all these to-dos, these adult to-dos, right? Having the patience to stretch that and teach them to enjoy, like be there for them for those moments, but at the same time, begin to teach them how to have respect for those around them. And I hear a lot of people give what I call lip service to that, but I'm like, our children actually learn by who we are with them more than any other factor on the planet. Like they don't,
My God.
you can tell and tell and tell and tell. You can give them every scenario and story in the book, but they actually learn by how we are with them.
That's why being present is so important. And you really got to watch your language. And I'm not talking about swearing. I'm talking about how, like with my wife and I, we have a very cool kind of interaction that we do.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a lot of storytelling and it's a lot of joking.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot, and so there's a lot of talk that we both know, and it's not negative at all, but it's if you can tell by our tone that we're joking.
Right.
However, like my wife would say, "Oh, Daddy's just talking a bunch of. Would you stop talking nonsense? Because I'll be talking about the universe and I'll be talking about this." And mom, who's very much awake, believe me, but she has little time for suffering fools who don't walk the walk. So she has a word for them. She calls them fluffertins. And she goes, "Oh, Daddy, you're just talking nonsense." And then Nezzy, like she was going, she'll go to school and say, "Well, Daddy's just talking nonsense." So we had to really have a conversation between Nicola and I about watching our actual language, because they absorb everything that you're doing and not even just on speaking terms, but even emotionally. I mean,
Yes.
this kid knows what's going on. If there's some sort of tension in any kind of tension in the house, she is completely aware of it, even though we try our best to hide it.
Yep.
Everything from her, because we just want her to enjoy being a kid. We want her um, to just have a lot of fun. And we live right next door we kind of live on a kind of compound here. We live next door to her Omi and Opie. And her Omi and Opie they're from Germany, and they are old school. I mean, they are old school. Beautiful people, generous to a fault, will do anything for you, but they're old school. So they've got old school mannerisms around them.
Now,
And
I want to hear all this, but when you say old school, because
Mhm.
different people understand old school differently. Can you tell me what
Yeah,
you
I'm
mean by that?
talking, these people make their own medicines, plant medicines, they grow gardens, they build timber frame homes, they can live off the land, they they concoct potions with
Self-reliant, self-sufficient, old school.
very, very,
Yeah.
very much so. And the old remedies, the old think, along with that comes an old way of thinking as well.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
updated where it needs to be updated, but really old school. And every time Inez goes over there, she learns something, from the old school, which
That's
I love,
cool.
which
Yeah,
I
that's
love.
cool.
There's some of the, but there's no elbows on the table. You sit at the dinner table, right? You sit at the dinner table. So Inez, she'll go around and say, hey, your elbows are on the table, and you're doing this, but then after dinner, she's crawling underneath the table and trying
Mhm.
to get her uncle, because we all eat as a family, which I think is one of the, which is one of the, I think, one of the most important things that we can do
Mhm.
as a family, because there's multiple generations at the table.
Yeah.
Um, Food is very important to this group. We cook the old fashioned way. Inez hasn't, she's 5, she'll be 6 in a couple of weeks, and she's never even had a drink of pop. So,
Ah,
like
congrats.
yeah, I know. Well, that's obviously a conscious choice. And she didn't even like chocolate up until like last year. Now she likes chocolate. So, but we're getting to the point where, she's going to start experimenting with stuff at school, for instance. She's going to get pop, but she's very good. When we send her out there in the world, we think she's like a little hellion in the house, right?
Hmm.
And she doesn't listen. But when
Hmm.
she goes out there in the world, she's really quite good. So which tells me that I think we're doing a decent job.
It does. And the other thing that I hear a lot of parents say something along those lines, but what a lot of parents don't think about or necessarily no one's ever said to them, or I don't know, they just don't get there. It's just she's that way because you guys are her safe spot, which is that's huge. I mean, being able to have that rapport with your child, that connection point, that attachment, that safe attachment is absolutely huge for their psychological, mental well-being as they grow, because they can come and be whatever it is they need to be with you. And when they go out there, it means that they can show up however they need to show up out there. And a lot of parents go, God, they're just like, I don't know what to do when they're home. They're blah, 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 blah. But when they go out there and everybody says everything nice about them. And in fact, I've even seen them, like I witnessed them by the edge of the playground when they don't know I'm there and they're behaving well. But the minute they see me and I'm like, that's because you're the safe spot. That's a good thing.
It is such a good thing, and we have to be careful as parents, and there's one thing that Nicola and I try to do is we try not to put on our beliefs onto Inez. We don't want her knowing our little hangups,
Nice.
and another thing that is that I really admire Nicola for is Nicola is not a daring person. She is as solid as they come. I mean, this person can pretty much do anything,
Mm-hmm.
and she's as solid as they come. But she can be a little bit overprotective when it comes to Inez. So I see her holding back, and I know that takes every fiber of her being to do this, because she needs to know that we're at the playground. Inez has got to tumble off a teeter totter every now and then. You can't be there to sort of like shield them um, from everything.
Right.
And when I was looking at when I was growing up, it was a different world. We would just go out of the house, and there was construction all around us because we were in a new neighborhood, a newish neighborhood. And like I said, it was nothing for a kid to come home with a nail stuck through their foot. I mean, we'd be mortified by that today. But
Mm-hmm.
my parents just said, okay, get the iodine and we'll be okay. There was no getting a tetanus shot every single time a rusty nail was driven through your foot, you know?
No, but I relate. Even though I didn't have the neighborhood, the mountain that I grew up on,
Oh,
I and my brothers, it was like you'd be gone all day. Basically, it's just don't be late
yeah.
for dinner. Don't be late for dinner. You're gonna miss dinner, kind of thing. But like, so I laugh because a couple months ago, a little longer than a couple months ago, I my kids went out. We have this like rock mountain out behind our house, and they climb all over it. And that was hard for me because there's like little mini cliffs that are like 10 feet, 15 feet,
Yeah.
right? And I can see them,
Yeah.
the same thing that you're talking about. But they were out there playing, they were fine. And then they got quiet. And I thought, oh no, oh no. Okay,
Mhm.
so I went out to check and I can hear my kids, and then all of a sudden I hear the rhythm of their voices and I hear the tonality, and I'm thinking they're really excited, but they're scared. And I thought, uh-oh. So I start catfooting it, like I'm sneaking. And I get up there, and my daughters, my twin daughters, are like 30 feet up or more, 30 to 40 feet up this pine tree. It's like maybe the second time they've climbed a pine tree. The first time they've done it all by themselves. And of course, right below the pine tree, I kid you not, we're talking a tumble of sharp, jagged, granite, pointy rocks that are like ranging from a foot in size to 4 feet in size, pointing like this, right?
Yeah.
And I see my little girls way the heck up there. And my heart just goes, and I'm thinking, that cannot come into my voice. Like
That's right.
that can, and so I said, so they were so excited, and they were so excited they were getting sidetracked from holding on to the tree, right? And holding on to the
Yeah.
branches. And I said, oh, wow, I see what you're doing. Stay focused. Okay, now the way you climb a tree, and I coached them to get all the limbs closer to the trunk and climb down
Yeah.
the tree, and I was just cool as a cucumber.
Yes, you've got to be. They'll read your, I mean, they'll read that tenor in your voice, and suddenly they'll start saying, "Oh, perhaps I'm in trouble here."
Well,
But if
what's
they don't know, and this is the thing about fear, this is what cripples so many people about fear, is that they will make up illusions in their head about what we so quickly go, especially with our kids, go to worst case scenario
oh
right off
yes,
the bat
oh yes,
before
absolutely.
anything happens. And and what is fear but an emotion? And in a vacuum, these emotions don't mean anything.
Well, there's
However, as a parent, of course, your job is to protect.
well, and I laugh, and I still laugh over that for a couple of reasons. One is it. So I don't want to leave the fear thing behind, so I'll address that first, and that is
Mm.
I see so many people conflate fear with not being able to move. Like, I'm afraid, therefore I can't do anything. I'm afraid I have to fix the fear first. And I'm like, no, no, you fix the fear by taking action. And I can laugh because it scared me obviously to see my kids that far up in the tree. But the other part of the reason why I was so amused was like, gosh, I used to climb hundreds of feet up in the giant trees up in the forest where I lived as a kid. My mom would be yelling for me, and I'd know, gosh, if she looks up, she's going to faint. So I'd come down a good 30 feet or more before I go, Mom, I'm up here. And she'd still yell at me, get down from there before you fall. And, but I learned so much from those processes as I was a kid. And I thought, well, as my kids were coming down, how do I not have this happen like this? Not teach them fear, but also not encourage them to do this when I'm not here. So I congratulate them for what great climbers they were. And next time you do that, make sure mom's around.
Well, the fear thing really is interesting because it comes a lot from us, but it also stifles the kid. If the kid
Yeah,
goes into anything with fear in their mind, they're not going to have they're not going to be able to use all those amazing abilities that they have. And
right.
when it all starts with what goes on inside of them, if they start thinking about what could go wrong, they're never really going to enjoy that process because
Right.
they're climbing that tree because that is the coolest thing to do at that moment.
That's
And
exactly
they're
it.
looking and say, how cool is it going to be to take a view from the top of that? Are they thinking about falling? Absolutely not.
Nope.
Not
Well,
at all.
well, and what's fascinating about what you just said to me, what is that when we look at something like quantum physics, we think of focus, right? What
Mhm.
you focus on, you get more of. And then you become a parent, right? And I can tell you the adrenaline rush I saw when I saw my daughters that high. And I'm
Mhm.
thinking, I can't bring that into my voice, and I have to deal with it myself. So I always think of it like this. When I'm coaching someone, it's self mastery. I bill it as self mastery, right? When you think of parenting, I think of it as parenting from the inside out, because if you don't own that, then it winds up being an overlay on your children. right? And it's incredibly powerful, I think, as a parent to master that in yourself and bring it into your speech and how you're talking with your children. And I'm curious, like for you as a father, you know, you've already shared with patients, and we've talked about fear, but like, and we've talked about the importance of words. How, like, what stands out to you about that process of like parenting from the inside out as a father?
Well, sometimes I tend a little bit, I tend to live a little bit in my head.
Mm-hmm,
Okay. So um, we want to make sure that everything that we do, we just don't want to act, right? We just don't want to act, especially if it's a negative emotion that's going to come out, because that can really, over time, and maybe only the one time, can really affect a young person's growth. And one of the things that I learned, I started when I was going to become a parent, I started watching some podcasts, and I was really into being cognizant of my upbringing at the time,
mm-hmm,
and subsequently my need for freedom, because I felt as a child I was, somewhat oppressed. And a lot of this came from me, but a lot of it came from, what happens to you before you're 7 years old. I mean, we all know, science has now proven, I've watched a lot of Gabor Mate talking about, show me the kid at 7 years old and I'll show you the human that you're going to be. So those first 7 years, we were, we were being, up till this point, where Inez will be 6 next week in a couple of weeks, that we wanted to make sure she did not experience fear. Now, when I say fear, I'm not talking about not survival fear, where you need to be able to know that you don't cross the street when there's without looking. I'm not talking about, caveman um, fear. I'm talking about illusionary fear, the boogeyman. The
mm-hmm,
even though it's real, don't get me wrong, it's real. Or um, uh, even us blowing up. Should she do something? Where she's, especially when she's doing it during play.
mm-hmm,
So we don't want, we have to put things in perspective. Is it annoying sometimes? Yeah, it can be annoying. But really, what's the big lesson there? Is there a bigger lesson there? Oh, you're trying to be creative. You tried something new. It didn't work out. If we got all bent out of shape about that, if she was painting and all of a sudden she started mixing colors and it got on our, on our furniture or whatever, like you say, okay, that is annoying as heck, and there has to be a talk there, but let's not blow it out of proportion to the fact where we're going to scare the, you know, her into thinking about whether or not that's the next time, that what happens to her the next time.
mm-hmm,
And we find that talking with her, sitting her down in a calm, calm, calm voice, and not necessarily right at that time, though it does matter. Time is sensitive because they got to know what's going on, because they'll just go away.
yep,
And I think this type of consciousness about where you're at and showing her to have fun, enjoy being a child, and do not live in fear. Yes, there's awareness. Like, as soon as, if we're in a parking lot and we're going swimming and I say parking lot rules, she knows exactly what that means.
mm-hmm,
She knows, stay close to mommy and daddy. When we were in Germany, we were in Europe this past year, like, there's a lot of traffic. And in Germany, it's much different than Canada. I'll even say the United States, because Canada and the United States are very similar.
mm-hmm,
But in Canada, especially in small town Canada, the pedestrian always gets the right of way,
mm-hmm,
right? But in Germany, that's not the case. Cars, vehicles have the right of way, and you stay on the sidewalk and you obey the signs, and you clearly look before you go, because there's a lot of traffic, and there's that's just the way it is, and it's very efficient. So we were a little bit worried because, we're sitting Inez ahead of us. Okay, you can run ahead now. We're at that stage. And when we were in Europe, we were thinking, okay, can we still do this? We're going to test this. So we gave her a little bit of line, a little bit of line, and a little bit of line. And sure enough, she was great. She
mm-hmm,
understands the environment that she's around with. And that didn't come from scaring her to death. That
mm-mm,
didn't come from yelling at her. It just came from showing her what is there. You don't want to get hit by a car. If you get hit by a car, it's going to hurt, and blah 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 blah. We don't say she's going to,
Building what some people call situational awareness.
Yes.
And I'm also going to add a layer to that a little bit and say consciousness, because while those two are very intertwined, I don't think they're necessarily exactly the same thing. And
Agreed.
and when I hear you speaking, I'm hearing you really bring presence and consciousness into how you and your wife parent. And I think that that's really, really beautiful. And we honestly need a lot more of it in the world, because one of the things I hear just so loud and clear coming through your shares is holding the safe space for your daughter to grow into her human self without the negatives of her parents' overlays as much as possible. I call them overlays. So that your fears, your belief systems that are not serving you, you guys have tried to hold those back and find ways of kind of building this safe container for her. And that brings me to a couple points. That is, number one, it's such a female thing to flinch at the playground, right? Or the in our case, the mountain out back, or they climb too crazily on whatever slide or whatever. And it's a very fatherly thing to say, okay, they're going to fall. That's going to happen. And they have to have that experience. So that dynamic that I hear you expressing is very beautiful and spot on. The other side of that is that you're talking about building this container, that you two have teamed up and built this container for your daughter. It's incredibly important, and maybe not talked about enough in my point of view, to build that container for our children, and specifically for our female children. They can't actually step into their feminine without that container. It's not safe to. And so the fact that you guys are providing that for her at such a young age is actually really incredibly empowering for her, I would think, as she grows into her adulthood. The other thing that I want to parse apart before we move on is that 0 to 6, 7 year frame that we're talking about, where the brain is mostly in a theta state, is really, really, really receptive, right? It's pivotal and it's important. But one of the things I want to kind of reach in and tweak a little bit, or just put out there for people to listen to, it's pivotal. So you've got that right. No argument, hands down, absolutely. What I think is important for people to understand is, as parents, our power to repair things within that time frame as our children grow, meaning it's the template. It is not written in stone. So it's like the hard drive template of our children's identity, that time frame, right? Yeah. However, that template can be affected to the positive with your own growing consciousness and awareness as parents, and be shifted by how you interact with your children at ages 8, 9, 10, and up. And I'm wanting to talk into this, Alden, because so many people get to this stage of 7 and they feel like they've messed up, right? They've messed up so bad. And there's a part of them that sort of just goes, that's the way I am as a parent. And there's a part of them that gives up, right, on showing up in a way that is so needed. And I'm just kind of wanting to go, no, don't do that. Yes, they have a template, but you have a massive impact. Yeah, and I'm not saying you're doing that, but the fact that you brought that.
I get it. I get exactly where you're coming from. I think you're absolutely right, because even though, and there's 2 things going on here that we should address beforehand when it comes to my situation. Okay, between me and my wife, we have over 100 years of life.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So you think about that experience when it comes to raising a child.
Yes.
Especially if you're involving consciousness.
Yes.
So imagine you're 20 years old and you're a couple of 20-year-olds raising a kid. Not that you can't.
You have less than 5 decades.
What's that?
I said you have less than 5 decades of experience.
Exactly. I mean, you think about it. It seems like a lot, but you're 20 years old. You know how much growth happens after 20.
I do.
For a lot of people. so we were blessed in that area. We were able to, we were able to bring a lot of wisdom to the table and understanding what we wanted, what we didn't need. And you're absolutely right. Yes, of course. But I think the thing about the 7-year-old is if you give that kid all those tools of happiness and living in no fear and the ability to fail without consequence, within respect to importance and levels, and if you give them that, then it's not all going to be rosy when she turns 8, 9, 10, and 12. There's going to be more challenges involved. However, those challenges are going to be a lot easier to handle because you've raised a confident kid.
Exactly.
Now, however, because we have 100 years between us, if there was 40 years between us or 50 years between us, and we were still growing and still trying to figure ourselves out, which is,
Yes.
an ongoing
Common.
process no matter how old you are,
Mm-hmm.
um, yeah, you could hit a couple stumbling blocks, and it is salvageable, absolutely. But it comes down to you, the parents, understanding that, looking at needs, looking at wants, looking at how it is you can seek help.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can't figure it out, and I find women to be, and I know this may be a generalization, and please don't rake me over the coals for it. I just feel the intuition, the female intuition is just so powerful. At least in our dynamic here, I,
Oh, I did.
maybe that whole 3 years of breastfeeding thing, that you just create this bond that is just unbreakable.
It's more than that, actually. You're
Yeah,
onto something there. So I'm going to say that the
yeah,
mama and the papa both have amazing intuition, but how those intuitions function per regard, your little one tends to be different. And part of the reason why is that actually when your baby's in utero, you're exchanging not just blood flow, there's this whole energy communication pathway that I won't be able to break down and do justice on this podcast, that happens
I
in
get it.
utero.
I'm getting the chills because we may not be using the language, but I get it.
But literally, that embryo is nurturing the mother as a mother is nurturing it. It is this whole cycle thing that happens, this whole communicatory thing that happens in utero. Then they come out, and the first severance from that source is the umbilical cord. And then you go to nursing, right? And that is so that's the connection, and there's this whole bioenergetic feedback loop that happens. Like when my kids were little tiny, i could I could take a raging fever and just hold them close to me, skin to skin, nurse them,
Right.
and bring that fever down faster than any medicine because my body would respond to what they needed, right? And so what happens is there's still this energy pathway, there's still this communicatory pathway that happens between a mother and her child.
Right.
We can feel at that stage, we know when something's wrong because we're still that connected. Then we wean them. That's another layer of separation that makes it harder for us as females, but we still have these things, and it actually happens. There's this connection scientifically. It's proven. This is really cool. I'm a geek, right? I know. It lingers until around 18, 19 years old, where there's that, I think, maybe final break where they step out in the world. I don't know, but it lingers for at least that amount of time, this sort of connection. So you're not wrong there. It's because there's an actual pathway built where we feel what's going on with our kids. So we can say, hey, Papa, wait, I feel whatever, or I know whatever. And Pop's going, how do you know that? Well, that's how we know that. And that's not to dismiss, right?
It's quantum entanglement, especially with mom and child, I think, because of the energies that, like you just said, that are flowing back and forth between mother and daughter and mother and child. And the other thing that, what we were very conscious about when we decided to have Inez is that um, Nicola took no drugs. She took uh, none of the shots that were when we sat down with the doctor. What we're going to give you a shot for this. We're going to give you a shot for that. And we're going, okay.
Wow.
We really went through, and our doctor was really cool. We said, okay, what does this do? Oh, boom. What's the rate of probability? Told us, he goes, I'm going to have to get those for you. And we did. We had another meeting. We talked with their doula, and we were sitting there and going, okay, yeah, this, if you have this, you're going to be in 0.000175 percent at risk. And we go, oh, well, you know what? My wife is very healthy. I'm very healthy. And, we eat right and we're like above health wise, we feel
Hmm.
very confident with our health. I said, I don't think we need that. I mean, and with consultation with Nicola, of course, because,
Right.
I'm not there to make it. This is her body. This is her doing it. But we both had the same belief system. So
Right.
very few shots, no anesthetic, no anything, natural birth, and the whole 9 yards. And
Amazing.
because there was a little bit of tearing, they had to cut the umbilical cord early, like, right off the bat. And we said from the very beginning, no, let's leave that in there for 15 more minutes or however long at the time until it needs to be severed.
Hmm.
And our doctor, who was such a cool guy, he's a friend. He's such a cool guy, and he just said, "Well, we got to do this because of what's going on here." I said, "Okay." There's because there was a lot of bleeding, and we had to
Yeah.
look after. We had to. It
Look
was
after mom.
exactly. We had to do that, and but really everything that we did in the hospital and everything that they did here with us, we were absolutely amazed with. But that connection, I understand what you're talking about completely, and it is absolutely fantastic. Like it's amazing when you can have that connection that it's as real as anything else. It's as real as any sense that we have.
It is, and I actually credit it for that connection. I credit it for saving my one twin's life because when they came, they she had to go to the NICU and her sister got to stay with me. And I could feel her all the way across the hospital. This little one didn't have any words, she's brand new. They came early. We had a complicated pregnancy. And I have all the regulations in the hospital telling me what to do, how often I can touch my daughter, blah, blah, blah. And I just kept pushing against all those barriers because I could
Yeah.
feel she needed me and she needed her sister. And they actually wouldn't let me hold them both to start off with. Um, how I got that to happen was I had there was a new lactation consultant on the floor, and they come in, especially when they're preemie and little. Um, and when she came in the room and she was new to me and she was new to the floor, I acted like this had been protocol. And I just said to her, will you hand me her sister? Because I felt she needed her sisters. And this little girl was laying there. She wasn't thriving. She wasn't responding in the way they want. She wasn't cueing. She wasn't showing interest in any of these things that are life-giving.
Yeah.
Um, and the nurse was like, she didn't know this lactation consultant. So she just brought her right over. And like, I kid you not, less than a minute, I still get chills when I talk about it. Less than a minute, her sister's head right next to hers. She opened her eyes, started moving around, which she wasn't doing.
Yeah.
Color started coming up. She started queuing like crazy to eat. And I looked at the lactation consultant and I told her our story. Look, they haven't allowed because can you please tell the nurses what just happened? Because she's like in tears because she'd been working with my baby, right?
Gosh.
But that's because of
Can you
what I could
imagine?
feel.
Could you imagine those two shared a room, shared a womb without a view? They
Yes.
shared a womb without a view for 9 months,
8.
feeling
Yes.
each other's elbows, knees, touching their entire, that is so. Imagine separating that.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly it.
Like
And I
losing
could
a
feel
part
it.
of yourself.
Yes. And that was exactly the feeling, by the way. That was exactly it. It's like I can't breathe. I can't function. Everything that means something to me is gone. I could feel that. And if I let myself, I can still go into tears over that. It was so palpable. And so the point with that is just that, yes, there is that connection and it is so real. This is not like, I don't even know what to call.
Can you imagine? I mean, there's protocol. If there's anything that is a system, it's the health industry.
Mhm.
And so when you have rules, they say, no, this is the way we do it. This
Right.
is what we have to do. This is what we've been taught. This is the way we always do it. And imagine when a mother says, I think my child will respond better if she's next to her sister. Boom. Think about that. That's what mothers are. And with whether this new person understood that or not at that particular time really doesn't matter. The fact that you made it happen, I think is incredible. And you're right. Hey, tell everybody this is what happened, because sometimes the rules should not matter. Yes, in a big system, overall, the rules are important. Don't get me wrong. In every system, that's what they're there for. But they're also there for convenience. And yes, and in the medical system, they'll tell you that they're there for your safety as well.
Mhm.
However, there's just some things in our world that we are still coming to grips with that the mainstream just doesn't fully get.
Right.
That should not be one of them, by the
I
way.
don't think it should be one of them, but I also think when we're talking in terms of systems,
Mm.
yeah, we need the frame, but we need to make, I think, as a society, make the frame flex. I mean, because it changed on that floor when when the lactation could, because she was in tears too, because she'd been helping take care of my baby.
Oh,
She just so having that professional's opinion on the floor with the other nurses changed how that floor operated,
yeah,
right?
cool.
So
You want to
that's
hear a
all
story?
good. Yes,
You want to hear a story?
yes.
My experience was not good.
Uh-oh.
So there, I don't have to really do anything, massage, put some pressure on when I have to, you know, be there to be of support, try to use a little humor. But when Inez was born, she wasn't moving. And I never understood this whole 0, 1, 2, 3 thing. You know this?
I'm drawing a blank.
Got to do with cognition and movement and things that they have to check off with the child
Oh, yeah,
when
yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, now
right.
I'm with you.
So I'm looking at my wife, and then I'm looking at Inez is over there, and they're rubbing her,
Right,
right?
right.
And
She's
then
not,
they're
yeah.
rubbing her, and then they're taking turns.
Mm-hmm,
And suddenly there's 3 people in the room. There was 2 nurses in the next thing you know, there's 5 people in the room,
mm-hmm,
and they're all being so very calm about this whole thing. And
mm-hmm,
meanwhile, and I'm sure this didn't take as long as it, but for me, I was dying inside.
mm-hmm.
In fact, I suffered PTSD about it. And I had to actually go see somebody because I was sitting here watching. You're basically what you think, because remember, we talked about going to that worst case scenario right
Yeah,
off
yeah.
the bat,
Yes, absolutely. That's where
right?
we have to rein ourselves in.
And I'm sitting there and I'm standing there, and my wife's looking at me. She goes, "Is that it?" And I'm going, "Yeah." And then I'm looking and I'm thinking, okay, great. And then there was finally a little bit of movement, after what seemed like an eternity. But for me, the damage was already done.
Right.
The damage had already been done, and I was like, "Oh my God!" I said, "What am I?" I remember, and then she was finally able to give it to my wife, and then of course, the baby looks up, and you just sort of like, "Oh, okay."
Everything changes. Yeah.
But the damage was done.
How did you address that as a father?
I went I went and got help. Well, first thing I did is I went home and I got stinking drunk. I got so drunk. I got stinking drunk by myself, and I was just, and then I went in the next day and I was a mess, and then I saw the kid, and the next day, a kid looks like
Mhm.
a kind of like a prune, with a little silly hat on it. And then when you come back the next day, oh my God, there's this smooth kid, smiling kid at you. And I almost fainted. I was so relieved, but the damage was already done.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
damage was already done, and I had to go see somebody. And but really it was a lot of work on my part to, I'm pretty mentally strong. So I basically, even though I was seeing somebody and I can understand what they were doing, and not to say that I'm the end all to know all about what goes on in a person's mind in particular times, but I know myself very well, and
Hmm.
I appreciated what the psychologist was trying to tell me and what they were doing. And you're right, but it's like an awakening. You just have to experience it yourself, and and I did, and that's exactly what I did. I said, look, this is an emotion. This is something that you created, and you have to let that go. And I did let it go, and I was able to come back, but it took me a couple of months. It took me a
I,
couple of months.
I can hear that, and I think it actually brings to my mind the importance of properly preparing parents. And I mean this because they don't. There were so many things that I wasn't prepared for, and I would say that I was maybe more prepared than most. And it drove people. I drove people crazy because I wanted to know every single detail of things I hadn't experienced from people who had experienced it. And they go, "Oh, that's really, that's a lot. I don't know if you should know that." And I go, "No, no, I want to know." Um, what what freaks people out is my kids, my daughters were born cesarean. They had to be because we had a medical complication. One of the main arteries wasn't wrapped up in the umbilical the way it needed to be, and if it would have been severe, they'd have had 3 minutes to save their lives. And we were lucky. We made it. We made it up to about 8 months. I think it was 8 months on the day, and then did a cesarean. They would have freaked out if they would have known because they block you off and they won't let you observe. And that's fine for most people. That's what they need. Me, I'm the opposite. The more I know, the better I am. I'm watching the reflection in the chrome around the light.
Wow.
I watched the whole thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that was calming for me. But I know that it wouldn't have been for most people. The other thing that was calming for me is I actually have memory of when I was born, and I remember the doctor panicked. Actually, he was rubbing me, and I wasn't breathing, and so then he flipped me upside down and smacked me. I still remember that, and I remember breathing, and I remember him like, "You got a baby girl." It was this whole thing, right? But anyway, any thoughts you would like to share with people so before we hop off the podcast here that you think are important to know as a father, as a parent? Any thoughts you want to share with me or to the audience that stand out to you?
Well, I would say probably the biggest thing for me, I can only speak for me, is that we want to give this child that we've decided very consciously to bring into the world. But whether or not it was what we refer to as accidents or what, it matters not. You've decided that this child is going to be a part of your world,
Mm-hmm.
and take the time, be present. I'm sure every person you've had on a podcast has probably said this very same thing, is that if you want to raise good, healthy, mentally strong children, give them the room to have fun, give them the room to fail, and don't don't allow them to live in an environment of fear or where they feel that they need to survive. Teach them good common sense. They'll get it by
Mm-hmm.
watching you. Just as you said, they're going to watch you. You are probably the biggest thing out there. So if it is you that has to actually step up and be a parent and not be like, it's the ultimate in adulting. Like there's no more um you know using certain language. There's no more um showing your bad habits unless you want to see them in your kid, because they're going to show up there because you're their world, you're their universe, and you are helping them create their reality. So be that person that you want them to be. That's not talking about not being real. This is not talking about not having your own hangups and how your behavior is. They got to know who they're going to be and what they've got to look forward to. And they have to look at you and your environment to see what is possible. But
Yeah.
the big thing for me was, let's grow up in a household that's happy and friendly and not full of fear and not in survival mode.
Those are huge points. And contrary to what you may think, I don't hear that all the time. So I'm really appreciative of you sharing that on the podcast. I think every parent loves their child and wants what's best for them, but you were very succinct in those sort of bullet points of most important things to attend to. And I really, really appreciate that. Um, it takes this consciousness coach thing that you have. to a whole new level when you think of it in the terms of parenting. So I really hear this presence and consciousness in what you're sharing. For people who want to find you to work with you, how do they find, H2HB or consciousness coaching? I know you're on LinkedIn, but where do they find you?
LinkedIn, I'm under the Spiritpreneur Coach on Facebook and Instagram. Anybody can check me out there, but LinkedIn is basically where I'm hanging my hat these days. I just find that for us to bring our message to the world, to the business world, really, because people are morphing into understanding that there is more to life. We didn't come to be here with this awareness that we have, with this consciousness that we have, why we decided to come to Earth. We're not here to, eat, sleep, work, 50 hours a week to live in survival mode. We're not here for that. We're here to enjoy. We're here to experience. Yes, we have to put food on the table. Let's do it with purpose. Let's do it with joy, as you often say. Let's just understand that this life is worth living. And yeah, there's going to be bumps along the way, but really we're here to do something amazing. And we've sort of gotten a little bit divided in our world in this last number of years. And you can see that it's been happening for a while. And
Yeah.
we got to get back to being the village again and understanding that, we are all one. And we're not here to, you know, we're not here to live without purpose. Find your purpose, find your joy, get to it, and do the best you can given the circumstances you have, and rise above things that you know that you can do, because that's what life is all about.
Stretching and growing. Well, there you have it, folks. Thank you so much for coming on, Alden.
Hey, thank you for having me. I had a ball. I had a ball.
Good, me too. So you can find Alden on LinkedIn. It sounds like Facebook, maybe IG, but primarily on LinkedIn. And right here on the Mamas Podcast, please click subscribe below, follow, like, share. And thank you so much, folks. And thanks again, Alden.
Thank you, Andrea.